Welcome to Issues of Contemporary Politics with Dr. Brovkin and Russian History with Dr. Brovkin. Today, I decided to take a pause from issues of contemporary politics and focus on the historical topic, which is the war on the Eastern Front, or the Great Fatherland War, or the Eastern operations of Germany against the Soviet Union from 1941 to 1945. The reason is that on May 9th, there will be a huge celebration in Moscow celebrating the 80th anniversary, and it has become a kind of a controversial topic. For example, Ursula von der Leyen says that President of Serbia, Vučić, if he goes to Moscow, will not be allowed to join the European Union. So they don't want to celebrate this. They have never invited Putin to celebrate it on the D-Day celebrations. And gradually the Russian role in the victory over Nazi Germany has been diminished. And in most Western narratives, you have some kind of a fighting in the East that nobody knows about except Stalingrad. And then all of a sudden there's a D-Day, and then the D-Day, and then there is victory. Now, of course, simple facts show that the D-Day was 175,000 Allied troops who landed in France. And then in August they took Paris, and the French celebrate the liberation of Paris by the Americans. Now this of course may be true, well it is true, but France probably would be still the province of Germany if the Red Army had not defeated the Wehrmacht, Nazi Reich. Because at that same time there were more than 5 million Russian army advancing on Berlin. And overall, just the figures show you what an amazing war it was, what a huge war it was. If we look at just the distances, in August 1941, the front line was from Leningrad to Odessa, which means it's 2,500 kilometers. That means that if you superimpose that distance on, let's say, Western European scale, it would be the distance from Hamburg to Sicily. That's the continuous front line between Germany and Russia. If you superimpose that distance on the United States, this would be the difference from Detroit to Miami. From Detroit to Miami, 2,500 kilometers, continuous fighting and the front line. This is how big this war was. But let me now go to the beginning and discuss in several videos this war that the Russians call the Great Fatherland War. Now, it started on the 22nd of June 1941. There are simple answers as to long-term and short-term causes, or the decisions to launch Operation Barbarossa, as the Germans called it. In very simple terms, the long term would be something that Hitler wrote in his book Mein Kampf, and this was the Lebensraum. This is his idea to expand to the east and take over the inferior peoples, Slavic peoples, such as the Russians and the Poles and others, and then expand Germany eastward. But this was, some people don't take it seriously because it's sort of like dreamlike, plans that were very far from ever being seriously implemented. But what did actually play short-term a role in Hitler's decision to actually go to war against the Soviet Union was his victory over France. It seems to me that when the Germans rolled into France and had it all done in a matter of 2 weeks, they had a sense of invincibility, and they had a sense that the German army is the mightiest of them all and could not be stopped. And so this is when they began developing the plans, Operation Barbarossa, which was a plan to conquer the Soviet Union in the Blitzkrieg, which is a lightning strike, and reached the area of Arkhangelsk to Astrakhan, which is the entire pretty much European part of the Soviet Union, of Russia. Beyond that line lies the steppes, the open steppes of the East European plains, all the way to the Urals mountains. And the beyond Ural mountains is Siberia. Now, the bulk of the industry, the bulk of the population is within that line, excluding the industrial area behind the Urals, which still is one of the major ones. So this was something that Hitler decided to do. And there was one other factor that made it quite speeded up the German decision to attack the Soviet Union. And that is the war with Finland. That is the Soviet war with Finland. This is a separate topic, and I'm not going to get into it, why this happened and who is doing what. The important thing for our narrative is that the Finns did very, very well. They had rendered enormous defeat to the Red Army with enormous, catastrophic casualties. By some estimates, close to 1 million Soviet soldiers who were poorly armed, had World War I rifles. The Finns had automatic rifles. They had new approach to war and all kinds of things I'm not going to get into now, maybe later. The point is that when Hitler looked at the Soviet performance in the Finnish war, he thought, well, if the Finns can defeat the Red Army, well, certainly we can. And this is when it was decided that it would be a blitzkrieg, it would be a lightning strike, and everything should be over by winter. Now, why 22nd of June? This is also a very important thing. Original plans were to start the war in April. But then because of Hitler's invasion of Yugoslavia in April 1941, he decided to postpone it. And as it turned out, these crucial 3 months, April, May, and June, were absolutely crucial, because if he had those extra 3 summer months, or warm weather months, he could have had perhaps a chance to take Moscow. That probably would not have turned the war completely, but it would have been a great psychological effect. But the way things were going, he had no time, as we shall see. So, on the 22nd of June 1941, the German armies moved. This was the huge army of 3.5 million people. This was actually the biggest army ever assembled at that time in Europe. The only thing that's on a comparable size was the Japanese invasion of China. Now they had 10 panzer divisions, which means special divisions consisting of tanks. They had thousands of aircraft. And just as to repeat, the scale of the invasion was that in August 1941, the front line stretched from Leningrad to Odessa, which means 2,500 kilometers. Now, the Germans were organized in 3 groups of armies. The group of Army North was supposed to take Leningrad. The group of Armies Center were advancing to Smolensk and Moscow, and the group of Armies South were advancing to Kiev, Odessa, and then later on to Kharkov and beyond. The Germans had incredible success in the opening weeks and months of the war. Absolutely astonishing. And that is partly by their new tactics, by their leadership, by talented generals such as Guderian, and by the tank armies. The tank armies were absolute innovation of Guderian that worked well in France, and now these panzer divisions just rolling in, and there was no force that could stop them. Also, the causes of the German success were that they didn't try to move in a continuous line. They would break through here and there, and they would send advance special operations units who would wear Russian uniforms, who would blow up the bridges, cut telegraph lines, send fake messages and orders as if they were coming from Moscow. They did all kinds of things that facilitated German advance. The advance was never practiced at that scale before. Just to give you an example, the Battle of Smolensk. Smolensk lies 700 kilometers from the border, which was covered in 3 weeks. And this is 2/3 of the road to Moscow, which is exactly 1,000 kilometers from the Brest-Litovsk fortress at the border to Moscow. 1,000 kilometers. So 700 of those were covered in 3 weeks. It was just absolutely astonishing speed of advance. Now, on the Russian reaction. Stalin, when the war started, fell into a kind of a stupor. He just could not believe what's happening, and he didn't speak, didn't talk to anybody. They say that he was locked up in his room and was drunk. And it was only on the 3rd of July that he addressed the nation. And for the first time, he called on the people to defend Mother Russia, not socialism, not communism, not achievements of proletarian revolution. He was so shocked because his whole calculation turned out to be wrong. His whole calculation was that there would be a long war between France and Germany, and that the Soviet Union would wait. And then when and if one side was beginning to win, then and only then the Soviet Union would interfere and help proletarian socialist revolution in Europe. That was the expectation, that was the plan. And of course, when France was defeated in June 1940, Stalin's plans were all overturned, and he didn't know what to do, and he tried what the West had tried too, appeasement. He's trying to be useful to Germany with all kinds of deliveries and trade and negotiations and all kinds of things. That did not help either when the Germans attacked in June 1941. So the advance was astronomical. One thing that was one of the hardest casualties, of course, was the prisoners of war. Absolutely incredible. In 3 months of fighting, the Germans took 3 million prisoners of war. Basically, the entire Red Army, as it stood at 2.7 million when the war started, was destroyed and taken prisoner of war. I can't resist mentioning here that among those prisoners of war was my uncle, Ivan Brovkin, who was a senior brother of my father, older brother of my father, and who was in the army when the war began. And it was many, many decades later that I found out in the archives what happened to him. The official record is he was killed in action on the 21st of August, 1941. And there were many like him, as I said, 3 million. So by the end of 1941, the Germans basically destroyed the entire Red Army, and it had to be raised all over again. Now, let's focus now on the war, the Battle of Smolensk, and after that, the Battle of Moscow. Battle of Smolensk is so incredible because it is at the same time one of the greatest achievements of German military might when they took Smolensk on 16th of July. And at the same time, it is one of the biggest blunders committed by Adolf Hitler. Just when the General Guderian and his commander, General von Hoth, took Smolensk, there came an order from Hitler to reposition, to stop the advance in Smolensk and go and move the panzer armies to the south to take Kiev. Now, for several days, Guderian ignored Hitler's order to finish the encirclement of the Russian armies around Smolensk, and only when it was done, he did execute the order and moved to the south. Now, in the south, he repeated his success over and over. Several more Russian armies Soviet armies were encircled, and on the 20th of September, Kiev was taken. And the road was open to Odessa. However, the time was ticking, and it was only in early October that Guderian was able to resume his offensive against Moscow. And again, the miracles that he played were astronomically important. That is, within 1 month, he moved the remaining 300 kilometers, and at the end of October, German generals could see the towers of the Kremlin in their binoculars. The advance units stood at 15 kilometers from Moscow. However, this is when things began to turn sour for the Germans. The first thing was the mud, and this is called Rasputitsa, and that is when there are period of rains and the clay roads turn into mud and become very, very difficult, especially for the tanks. The second thing that was slowing down is that the Russian defenses were strengthened, and they begin to fight much more effectively as the approaches to Moscow became nearer. And then, of course, in October, Stalin appointed as the commander of forces defending Moscow legendary General Zhukov, who brought his forces from Siberia. These were people who were good at fighting in winter. They were used to cold, and they were held in reserve, and now they were thrown into battle. So this brings me to the Battle of Moscow. In October, Stalin was not sure that they would be able to hold on to Moscow, and he actually gave the order to start evacuating some of the major ministries and documents and so forth. And as soon as that started happening, there was a panic, and there were many people who were just quitting Moscow on their own, fleeing, worried that the capital would be surrendered. To stop the panic, there had to be very rough measures undertaken by the NKVD, the secret police, or there's nothing secret about it, but the political police that was actually executing some people on the spot for spreading defeatist propaganda or any other kind of other activities that would be called treasonous. On the 7th of November, the Revolution Day, the traditional day when the Soviets celebrated the October Revolution, Stalin spoke to the people from the mausoleum on the Red Square. And this is his historical speech in some ways. And I listened to it, and what is striking to me today, on the one hand, it's the courage and determination to fight on. On the other hand, he kind of lied. In his speech, he said that close to 4 million German army was defeated, and that the Soviet casualties were 750,000. In fact, it was exactly the other way around. Close to 3.5 million Russian army was taken prisoner of war and was defeated, and the Germans' casualties stood at 750,000. Now, this is a very interesting figure, because on the one hand, it is a third less than what the Soviets lost. On the other hand, it's a third of the original invading German force. And it seems to be that this is a very, very serious loss. The Germans lost a third of the invading force. And as General Guderian wrote, the Russian resistance was getting stiffer all the time, and the was a total unpreparedness for the winter campaign. They had no mittens, they had no gloves, the German tanks couldn't be started. In winter they had to start fires underneath in order to get the engine going. The Germans were not prepared for the winter war. And that, of course, played into the hands of Zhukov and the Russian Central Command. So, on 6th of December 1941, the Russian counter-offensive began. And this is what is known as the Victorious March in the Battle of Moscow. Within a matter of 2 or 3 weeks, they repulsed the exhausted German forces 100 to 150 kilometers back. Cities like Tver and Tula, a very important industrial city where produced arms, were liberated, and the Germans were never going to take them again. So this was the first time that the German armies were repulsed, that the German machine was a war machine, had to stop, and the capital of the Russian state, of Soviet state, was now secure. This was the end of the Battle of Moscow, and I shall stop at this and continue it with this survey of the Great Patriotic War in my next video, which should be coming shortly. Thank you.